حسوق ما تضميسه وحيابها كلا دوان إيه كده هي مقدشو تي أقوم بيتي شرا دعوة وحان عندها يجاكو أركي أنا وصغيرة مدحيس وهذا الله يهدى وحشة أنا ومدح قان أنت كلا عاون هو يدي سدت وحن مغلي أساق يلا بك لا إني ودي إني أنت كوضا قان ومحيو دي قان ومدحي قار لود دوغي وأنت كلا قار لود دوغي واحد عاي معها واحد لود دوغ هذا كرنا معها.
ودن كينا ضد ماله ضد وعليه لكن ولا كلا يبسدي إيه ولا كلا يبسدي مركز دبعتنا هيسته صلباتنا يصدق
falkii maanta dhacay ee foosh xumaa inuu ahaa mid ay shabaabka iyo nabadiidku ay la beegsadeen
So on Monday, the capital of Somalia, Mogadishu, was rocked by a treacherous, incredibly devastating terrorist attack, where the last time I checked, the last article I saw said more than 320 people were dead. That number has probably risen since then, and over 300 people are injured. I know one article I read said 500. So, and this number continues to climb because the attack itself was a truck bombing, you know. So it was, and actually it wasn't just one. It was actually supposed to be multiple attacks. Now, luckily, the local authorities stopped the second truck from going off. So this attack could have actually been bigger than what it actually was, which is horrific if you actually think about, you know, how high the body count actually could be or could have been. Luckily, they were able to stop that second attack. Now, the first attack that actually did go off, that in and of itself was bad. The blast area covered a size comparable to 2 or 3 football fields, I saw in one article. And the Somali government believes that al-shabaab was behind the attack. Al-shabaab is a terrorist organization. But they have yet, as of the last article I read, they have yet to actually claim responsibility, which, according to that particular article, is something that they don't usually shy away from. But I'm just going to take the Somali government's word for it. They're in the area. They know what they're talking about. They have to deal with this on a daily basis. Al-Shabaab has been attacking Mogadishu and other parts of Somalia for years. They used to control a large swath of Mogadishu before being pushed out by opposing forces. The blast itself occurred in the busiest intersection of Mogadishu. Okay, and I read a report that said that in the neighboring buildings, there were hundreds of people in the neighboring buildings, and a lot of those buildings, at least a number of those buildings, were just leveled. They're still looking for people. They're still trying to pull people out of the rubble. And it's incredibly sad because things like this don't get enough attention. I know when it did actually happen, there were a few scant reports in the media, but that didn't last very long. And it's part of a trend that we see when it comes to terrorist attacks in Africa. Not just terrorist attacks, but even natural disasters. So, you know, large parts of Africa, you know, especially in West Africa, were flooded recently. That got no attention. Now I know, yes, Houston was flooded, and Florida was flooded, and there's been all sorts of devastation in Puerto Rico and in other parts of the Caribbean and the Caribbean islands. But this is pretty consistent. You know, the ignoring of issues in Africa as if they just don't matter is something of a norm, and you really don't see that when it comes to other continents. You don't see that when it comes to when it comes to Europe. So anytime there's a terrorist attack in Europe, it gets global attention, it gets global coverage. So I wanted to make this video to tried to, in my own little way, of course, I can't compare to the mainstream media and the reach that they have, but at least someone is talking about this stuff. Because I even see on YouTube, with regards to new media, there are a few outlets that are talking about it, but not enough. I don't really think enough people are talking about it. And it's almost as if a lot of people just don't care. Now, I know Somalia has a very troublesome recent history with terrorism. When al-shabaab is an arm of a previous group that have been in power since the early 90s. And they enforced Sharia law in that whole area. And when they were basically toppled, al-shabaab came out of them. So now al-shabaab is a Salafi jihadist group, which is an extreme, ultra-conservative, fundamentalist branch of Sunni Islam. What's crazy is the majority of the Muslims in Somalia are Sunni themselves. And there's also a resurgence of another faction of Muslims in the area, known as the Sufis. And they actually used to be, according to reports that I've come across, they actually used to be the dominant group in that area, in the country itself. But over the course of, several massacres, and I don't even want to call them wars because I don't think they were wars per se. They were just attacks by the more hardline Muslim elements in the country. Yeah, they were really almost wiped out. Now they are returning, but groups like al-shabaab, these hardliner groups, don't really view Sufis. They view Sufis as non-believers in Islam. And because of that, they deem them legitimate for attacks. So you have the Sunni Muslims who are in Somalia who are being attacked, and you have the Sufi Muslims in Somalia who are being attacked, and other ethnic groups as well. And one of the things that I think doesn't get enough attention in a lot of these situations is that oftentimes the biggest victims of terrorism, especially abroad in Africa and in the Middle East, typically tend to be Muslims. That doesn't get mentioned a lot, but it's the truth. Muslims tend to be some of the biggest victims of terrorist attacks, and this attack in Somalia in Mogadishu is a perfect example of that. Now, some of you guys may remember some previous terrorist attacks that were associated with al-shabaab in 2015, for instance. Now, these two attacks I'm about to mention happened in Kenya. So in 2015, you guys might remember that massacre at Garissa University where 148 students were murdered by al-shabaab gunmen who stormed the school. And then a couple years earlier than that, in 2013, al-shabaab attacked a shopping center in Nairobi, Kenya, and they shot and killed 68 people. So there's a lot of tension between not so much Kenya and Somalia, but Kenya and al-shabaab because of Kenya's support for the Somalian government, which is backed by the UN. And al-shabaab represents, like I said, a hardline faction, which, by the way, is associated with ISIS. They're associated with Boko Haram in Nigeria. And one of the things that really kind of boggles my mind a little bit is where are these guys getting their funding from? Where are they getting their funding? Where are they getting their weapons? Where did the people who created this bomb get the materials and the training necessary to do this? So you have to look at the funding. You have to follow the money. You have to look at the fact that you have countries like Saudi Arabia, which is widely considered by people who actually admit the truth to be one of the largest sponsors of terrorism around the globe. So that's important information. And they're one of our biggest allies in the region. I mean, to call it problematic is an understatement, quite frankly. So you have money that is going through different arms. I'm not entirely sure if the government is funding groups directly. I think they have back channel ways of actually doing this, getting money to some of these Salafist jihadi groups. And the money and the guns make their way to the Middle East. They make their way to Somalia and places like this. And they cause a lot of damage. Now, speaking for myself as someone who, sees the potential in a number of African countries. Africa is not a continent. It's split up into a number of different countries. So I'm not going to say Africa in general, but looking at specific countries, and you see a lot of the potential that they have. And in Nigeria, you see these terrorist attacks by Boko Haram. In Somalia, you see these terrorist attacks by al-shabaab. And it's really kind of depressing because these terrorists really hold back progress tremendously, especially in a country like Somalia, which has struggled mightily for a very long time because of people like the al-shabaab types. You know, they really hold back progress, and they really give credibility to people who don't want to see African countries succeed. So in many ways, they're kind of playing into the hands of, you know, global oppressors who want to see these countries continue to struggle and continue to be dependent on foreign aid for survival. And progress is not going to come through the barrel of a gun. It's not going to come through car bombings. And I don't really know what the answer, I don't think anybody knows what the answer is. You know, these people go around blowing stuff up. I don't know really if they have any type of goal or any type of agenda. They can't really seriously think that they're going to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. You know, so what's the end game? What's the point? At the end of the day, when you really just take a step back and you zoom out and you look at what's happening and you look at the amount of death and destruction that's going on, you know, you really just see mass murder. That's really just all it is. It's a bunch of serial killers on power trips, and they use religion to justify their barbarism. You know, so, I mean, I wanted to be one of the few people in the black spaces on YouTube who at least did a story about this. I think that it's our job in a way to lend, not necessarily voice, because I'm not Muslim and I'm not Somali. So my voice in terms of what, you know, how I can lend it to this situation is really limited. And then I don't have the largest platform, but together collectively, if enough of us on YouTube really kind of start talking about global issues that affect all people, not just African Americans, but Africans as well, and melanated people, Afro people in the Caribbean, and Afro people in South America. And we understand that the struggle for our survival and the struggle for our empowerment is really a collective struggle. We're not all going through the same things, obviously, but when you're dealing with a situation where the people over there have very limited access to the global world, right? And we here in America, I mean, in terms of like internet access and computers and things like that, it's not as widespread over there as it is over here. You know, so if the mainstream media refuses to talk about stuff like this, then we should talk about stuff like this. We should pick up that mantle collectively here in the West, and we should cover these stories and other stories like it. You know, it's the least that we can do. We can't do much, I know, because, you know, we're struggling. We have our own struggle against white supremacy over here in America. But this is insane. This is crazy. And most I can say is that I hope eventually this gets better, but in the short term, I don't see exactly how that's going to happen, because there are too many people profiteering off of death and destruction globally around the world. There are too many people giving guns to both sides. There are too many people funding terrorist organizations. And the United States, we have some very strange bedfellows in the region. Let's just keep it real. You know, so we don't necessarily have our hands clean either. You know, so this was a terrible attack. And I hope nothing else of this magnitude or anything related happens. But recent history shows that that's probably not going to be the case. And I just hope those people over there are able to stay safe the best way they can and keep their heads up. I know it's easy to say over here in America, thousands of miles away, you know, but we have to send some level of positivity and positive energy over there to that place, because they're really going through a lot.